Law. At Afford Law, we practice criminal and family law throughout Massachusetts. Our fees are based on a sliding scale based on your income. So the less you make, the less you pay. Today's episode, we're going to focus on a CWOF. What is a CWOF? CWOF. A CWOF is not a hairdo. CWOF is a CWOF. It stands for a continuation without a finding of guilt. So basically, there are several outcomes that are possible in a criminal case in Massachusetts. So if you plea bargain your case, if you plea out to your case, or if you take your case to a trial, there are different outcomes. There are different things that can happen as a result of that. So let's take a look at particularly at plea bargains, because really if you take your case to trial, you're either going to get a guilty or a not guilty. If it's a not guilty, there are no outcomes. You are free to go. If there's a guilty, there are a few options still available, but not quite as many as in a plea agreement situation. And a CWOF really comes up mostly in a plea agreement situation, although technically available at some trials, very few, very rare. A CWOF is really in a negotiated plea situation. So let's first talk quickly about what are the possible outcomes to a criminal case in Massachusetts. So there are a number of things, and there are sort of a hierarchy or a ladder of what those are, starting from best to worst. Best from our point of view, from the defense point of view. The best is obviously a dismissal. Nothing can get better than a dismissal. A dismissal can either be the Commonwealth, that is the prosecution, can look at the case and decide that they don't have enough to go forward with the case, or it was wrongfully charged, or something along those lines. The Commonwealth can dismiss the case at their discretion. Those are pretty rare, so we don't see those too often, but it can happen. So dismissal is the best. The next thing can be a dismissal based on some sort of action by your attorney. So your attorney may file a motion to dismiss based on a number of factors. It could be that the facts don't support the charge that you're facing, or perhaps there are things like the officer never should have stopped you in the first place. It was an illegal search, or something along those lines. So a case can get dismissed if your attorney is aggressive and goes after certain elements of the law that he or she would know quite well. So dismissal is the best outcome. The next thing up the ladder would be something along the lines of a pretrial probation. Another thing is a filed without a change of plea. Essentially, what both of those do are they take your case, they put it aside for a period of time. That period of time is specified in each case. And if you don't get into any more trouble, that is rearrested. If there can be with pretrial probation, there can be conditions where you have to do community service or attend a program or something like that. And with pretrial probation, you do have to pay probation fees of $50 per month. If all that goes well, your case would get dismissed at the end of that. Of course, the thing is, you've already been arraigned on that, so you do have an entry on your board of probation record. That's your criminal record. So that's something that you have to take in mind. Right above from that, from the pretrial probation and the filed without a change of plea, is a CWOF. Again, the CWOF is a short for CWOF, which stands for a continuation without a finding of guilt. What does that mean? Well, a continuation without a finding of guilt, basically you're not pleading guilty. You're not saying to the court or anybody else that I am guilty of this charge. Really what you're saying is, I think the Commonwealth has enough evidence, enough facts that they could provide to a juror, to a jury, and that those jurors could find me guilty, and I don't want to take my chances. So you're not saying you're guilty, you're just saying you're admitting to sufficient facts that someone could find you guilty. Now, there are two big advantages to a CWOF. The first big advantage is it is not a conviction. So if you have a CWOF on your record and somebody asks you, somebody like a potential landlord, a potential employer, or something along those lines, have you been convicted of this crime? If you have a CWOF on your record, you can truthfully tell them that you have not been convicted. Okay, so that's one of the first major advantages to a CWOF. Now, a CWOF is available on both misdemeanors and felony charges. So there's a big difference between being charged with a misdemeanor and certainly a felony, and having a CWOF on your record, rather than being convicted. Because if you have a guilty on a felony, you are a convicted felon. And that's going to have some significant impact for you for the rest of your life. Being convicted on a misdemeanor charge has significant effects as well. Obviously, a felony charge is much more serious. So that's the first big advantage, is that it's not a conviction. The second big advantage is that if you do well on probation, so what happens is you get a CWOF and you're placed on probation for a period of time. Let's just take, for example, 1 year. So you're on probation for 1 year on a CWOF. During that 1 year, you have to pay a probation fees. You have to pay court fees. Of course, as we always say, the government loves your money, and they are always looking for it. So you have to pay certain fees and fines. That's one of the conditions of probation. Another condition that's always on probation is that you cannot commit new crimes. You have to be of the peace, keep the peace, and be of good behavior. So that means if you get charged with a new crime, you could be in trouble. You could be brought in as a probation violator, and that's a whole other headache that you don't want to have to worry about. So a CWOF, in addition to those, to the fees and the fines and the not getting rearrested, you may have additional conditions on your probation. You may have to attend certain classes. You may have to remain drug and alcohol free, be subject to random tests. You may have a no contact, stay away order from the alleged victim, or any number of other conditions can be imposed upon you. If you successfully complete your program, so that means complete your probation. That means if you go for that 1 year, in our example, you pay all the money, you don't get rearrested, you do whatever other conditions are required of you. At the end of that year, your CWOF, the case that you have your CWOF on, gets dismissed. So ultimately, it's a delayed dismissal as long as you keep to the straight and narrow and don't get into any trouble. So that, again, the two big advantages to a CWOF is that it's not a conviction, and number two, ultimately, it can be dismissed. It can and will be dismissed if you do well on your probation. So that's what a continuation without a finding is. I just want to mention briefly. I mentioned that you'll be on probation, and if you get into trouble, they can bring you forward as a probation violator. Excuse me. With a CWOF, oftentimes what happens is if you are found to be in violation of your probation and you have a CWOF, the punishment could very well be that they convert the CWOF to a guilty. So now, instead of having no conviction on your record, now you have a guilty on your record, and that is a conviction which can cause serious problems for you. And if you took the CWOF on a felony charge, you are now a convicted felon, and that would be on your record forever. So very serious matter indeed. So that's a CWOF, and those are some of the outcomes that you could explore as far as pleading out to your criminal case in Massachusetts. So once again, at Afford Law, we offer criminal and family law legal representation throughout Massachusetts. Our fees are all based on your income. So we use a sliding scale. So what that means is the less you make, the less we're going to charge you, and the less you will have to pay for our services. We use a very experienced, very influential attorneys who take your cases very seriously. They're all in practice for a long time with a great deal of knowledge of the law and the legal system. However, they have agreed to offer their services at a reduced rate because they, as we, recognize that the justice system has been really forgetting about the working man or woman and their plight. Because what happens is if you're not making much money, if you're out of work, you could qualify for a court-appointed attorney. And if you have a lot of money, you can go out and hire an attorney at whatever rate they're charging. But what happens to the people in the middle? What happens to the middle class, the hardworking people? Those folks, if they're presented with a criminal or a family law matter, all of a sudden have to come up with a very large chunk of money, which they may not have. Due to no fault of their own, they're doing everything they can, going to work every day, supporting themselves and their families. We want to make it a little bit easier because anything having to do with criminal charges or anything in the probate and family court are so important, and the consequences are so critical and can have consequences for a lifetime. We want to make sure that those folks are represented by appropriate and competent counsel. So if you have any questions, please feel free to visit us at affordlaw.org. We have a lot of resources, a lot of frequently asked questions and answers to those questions. And you have the opportunity to book a free, no obligation, private consultation with us. We can do it over Zoom. Nobody has to know. Nobody will know. If you have any specific questions about your case, we'd be happy to answer them. So at Afford Law, we're making justice affordable.